In the past 20 years, as a personal trainer, strength and conditioning coach, and really for the past 10 years devoting my life to postural restoration, one thing you kind of eventually understand is that hip flexors, the idea of stretching hip flexors or releasing hip flexors, doesn't make a lot of sense because it doesn't really make sense to the brain, and it doesn't really make sense even biomechanically because the hip flexors and the psoas muscles, they do not operate independently of the rest of the body and definitely not independently of the brain. And it's the brain and the brain's, our neurological function that is going to either keep your hip flexors overactive or have you use them the way nature intended. Now, if you've only considered hip flexors and the psoas muscle in the context of gym exercises and rehab and strength and conditioning, this video will definitely challenge your biases or challenge your thought processes. And I even admit 20 years ago, the things I'm about to show in videos, how I can release or inhibit or turn off hip flexors in the activities that I demonstrate, that would probably seem a little crazy to me also, but I was ignorant. Not because I wasn't intelligent enough, I just wasn't exposed to the neuroscience behind this and the way that the brain and the body actually work. I was completely biased through strength and conditioning, personal training, and physical therapy. And it turns out that not a lot of that has any real basis in the way that the brain and the body actually work. So if you think some of the stuff that I'm going to show or talk about it seems a little out there, I can assure you all of these books, you could read any of them. What is Health? The Ear and Language, The Conscious Ear, Musicophilia. I got a lot of them. Rhythms of the Brain, To Dance is Human, Music and the Mind. All of these are neuroscience books. All of them talk about rhythm, speech, and breathing, and that is what I'm going to show is really what can inhibit a hip flexor or turn off a hip flexor without any gym exercises or stretching at all. The Postural Restoration Institute in Lincoln, Nebraska has identified this underlying pattern of right dominance that's kind of built into all of us. The idea that we're right dominant is not a new idea. We are. It's called lateralization. Right eye, right ear, right hand, right foot. That's the normal lateralization. Obviously, some people will break those rules. I am left eye dominant, there's no doubt. And that can cause problems when you don't have lateralization all on the right side, but that is not the point of the video. This right side dominance leads to a position of the pelvis that the Postural Restoration Institute calls the left AIC pattern, where the left side of the pelvis comes forward. This would be your left side, comes forward. The right side moves back slightly, or just not as far forward as the left side. In that position, what you're going to find, and this is when people test, when they come in to see me and I test them, that's what you're going to find. What do those tests look like? The first test you're going to see is this adduction drop test. This adduction drop test is a test of whether the pelvis is forward on that side. When the pelvis is forward on that side, the leg will not adduct. It will not go down. So in this picture, you can see, this is a friend of mine, her left leg does not adduct while her right leg does adduct. That is what the left AIC pattern is telling you. A pelvis in this position, the left leg will not adduct, the right leg will adduct. That's the left AIC pattern. The other test is this abduction raise, and what you find is the exact opposite. The right leg cannot abduct, it cannot go up, while the left leg can abduct higher. So everything's just flipped. What the left leg can do, the right leg can't do, and what the right leg can do, the left leg can't do. That is because of our internal asymmetries, of how our brain is set up, how our organs are organized, and that bigger right diaphragm. That is what you're typically going to see. This is completely normal. So the videos that I show, I'm not going to show the adduction test every single time. I've shown that test in a lot of videos on this YouTube channel. There's over 300 videos on this subject, on postural restoration. So if you not know what I'm talking about postural restoration. So everything I'm talking about is in the context of postural restoration. Using these two tests, I'm going to show how these hip flexors, so when a leg cannot adduct, when it can't go down, like in the first one, in the first picture, the hip flexors on that side are overactive. That's why people often have overactive left hip flexors. They are overactive, holding the pelvis forward on that side. On the right side, you'll have an overactive right inner thigh and an overactive right abdominal wall. I'm not going to talk much about the abdominal wall, just the right inner thigh, but those will be paired. So these are the two tests that you'll find. These are normal, completely normal outcomes, and these are the two tests that you're going to see change with the activities that I'm going to show. From a biomechanical perspective, what does a hip flexor do? Well, it does a couple things. It flexes the hip. It will also externally rotate a leg. So on the left side, it contributes to this left hip, this left pelvis coming forward into hip flexion. Left leg external rotation and abduction, that they're kind of combined. And it also counter-rotates the spine in the opposite direction. So when the left hip flexor and left psoas are overactive, and again, the left psoas is a hip flexor, so I'm just going to say hip flexors. When the hip flexors on the left are overactive, what you're going to find is a pelvis forward on the left, a left leg that's normally a bit externally rotated, and a lumbar spine that's oriented to the right. They all go together, which puts us over on our right side. This is my right side. That will put you over on your right side. That is the underlying pattern. So that's biomechanically what a hip flexor will do on the left side. I'm not going to worry about the right side right now because it's way more complicated and it's not the exact same issue. So that's a biomechanical perspective, but when you look at biomechanics strictly, you're taking a muscle completely out of context in terms of how we live, how the brain actually functions. A hip flexor, again, does not operate independently. If it's overactive or tight or whatever you want to call it, it's because the brain wants it that way for some reason. The brain is telling it to do that. The muscle doesn't do that by itself. So when you look at it biomechanically, you're stripping away all context of the human that's lying down on your table. You cannot consider the role of the hip flexors and the psoas outside of what the human brain is most concerned with, and that is navigation, i.e. standing up and walking forward to find food. Like, you could say food and water, but if you can't move forward, you're not going to find that food and water. So a brain is necessary to organize complex movement. That's pretty well accepted in neuroscience. And then communication. And communication, how we speak and how we move our bodies, is also dependent upon breath. And it so happens that the psoas and the hip flexors are directly tied into the diaphragm. So if you're not breathing appropriately, the chances of your left hip flexors or any hip flexors on either side to be completely working the way they're supposed to is probably not going to happen. Now again, a lot of people say, oh, I can stretch a hip flexor, I can release it, I can just feel my glutes and that'll take care of it. Do you have proof of that? Or is there an objective test that is showing that that is the actual outcome? Or is someone just saying, hey, I just released your hip flexor? These tests are actually, as long as you understand how this situation occurs, that if a pelvis is forward, a leg cannot adduct because a hip that's flexed cannot allow adduction or extension of a left hip. It's just, that is a biomechanical thing. That's just an explanation, a biomechanical explanation. But why we end up in that position, due to altered navigation, forward movement, altered communication, and altered breathing, that's the real issue. And that's what this video and the videos I'm going to show, that you can inhibit a hip flexor and relax a hip flexor and release it objectively with the test without doing anything remotely close to what you would consider a gym or rehab exercise. If you're finding this video interesting, could you like it, comment, share, or subscribe to the channel? I'd appreciate it. Thanks. Pertinent to the videos that I'm going to show, one thing you have to realize is, as this book shows, this is your brain on music, that your movement centers of your brain are inseparable from what you're hearing and what you're seeing. So that's important to understand the context of these videos and why what I show works. First, that these two systems, the way that you move and the things you hear, are completely inseparable. And what you like to hear and what you don't like to hear will influence how you actually move and whether those hip flexors will turn off or not. The other big thing would be posterior rib cage expansion, back on that left side. When we're arched, when we're in this pattern, our lower back is arched on the left side and everything is tight in that left lower back area. I can show it here. Here's the left side. This area gets real tight because your back is arched and those ribs tighten up. You have to be able to get air into that side for you to be able to get onto your, this is my left side. See, this is why I can't do it. To get on your left side, you have to be able to get air into that left posterior rib cage. One of the videos that I show is going to show that. And then the other is simply rhythm. Rhythm, watching someone with rhythm will inhibit a hip flexor. Walking to a beat, dancing, all those things. If you're on beat, your hip flexors will turn off. And I've already shown this in some other videos. I'd highly recommend watching Your Brain on Rhythm. That's another video I made a couple months ago that goes into even deeper depth about this topic. So there is an episode of the Huberman Lab. He has a podcast and he has a YouTube channel. He's a neuroscientist, and it's a pretty big podcast, and he has a lot of followers. He has one video about speech. He's speaking with a researcher, another neuroscientist that investigates speech and movement. And he also has a video about stretching. The one on stretching has millions of views, which really don't deserve it. And yet the one about speech and movement, that really deserves 1 million views, because if people understood that, you'd understand what I'm going to show. But also, that's what the brain is concerned with. The brain is not concerned with stretching. Stretching literally means nothing to the brain. It's not part of what makes us human in the sense of being upright, walking, and communicating. So in that video where he's talking with the speech researcher, the researcher points out that there's plenty of evidence that shows that before humans started to speak abstractly, before we started to communicate information, semantic information. So what I'm doing right now is I'm conveying semantic information. I am trying to explain an abstract concept. That's most of what we do these days with our speech. That's most of what our work life revolves around and what our studying and our schoolwork revolves around. But in reality, before that, humans more likely were playing music, dancing, and singing. They were doing affective communication. Affective, AFF, means emotion. Humans were conveying information through non-semantic communication. And he points out that only animals and humans that can produce or learn to make sounds can dance. It's really interesting. You definitely should read it, or watch it. But all those things are connected. And really, when you watch my videos, just think about that. And all those things, singing, dancing, and affective communication, requires breath. So this is the first video. This is my friend Patty. Patty is, her parents are from Greece, so she speaks Greek and English. Obviously, she speaks more English than she does Greek. So here we are. I'm testing her left leg adduction, and as she's speaking to me in English, because I'm talking to her in English right now, her leg will not adduct. I'm pushing down, it will not adduct. Now I tell her to speak in Greek. I tell her to say, "Neal, you're a sexy beast." And she can adduct no problem. So, why? Tell the truth, I don't really know. But it's certainly a neurological thing. I have some suspicions because remember, what you hear is directly related to the way that you move. Your auditory system and your motor system are completely intertwined. And also, what you hear is also part of the vestibular system, and vestibular reflexes. When the vestibular system, the balance system, gets threatened, your extensor muscles like hip flexors and neck and lower back and calf muscles will tighten up to hold you steady. So there's a lot of influences right there. But the moment that she speaks a different language, my guess is her brain hears something different. And to inhibit a pattern of overactivity, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, because you're just going to stay in that pattern of overactivity. You have to do something different. So if your life consists of going to work, staring at a computer, and lifting weights, you're screwed. I'm sorry, you're screwed. You have to do other stuff. Hopefully you'll do stuff, where'd I put that book? Hopefully you'll do stuff like this, where he talks about what I just spoke about before. Art. I didn't even say it, sorry. Sacred. Sacred practice defined. Sacred means reverence for the ineffable, what causal speech cannot express. Sacred practice includes sex, music, dance, art, stories, jokes, monumental constructions, and a multitude of ceremonies surrounding birth, puberty, marriage, and death. Sacred experience elicits intense emotions, such as awe, joy, or grief, which somehow bring relief. Why our species, why humans required sacred practice throughout human throughout human history, is an important question to be considered later, which he talks about. For now, simply notice that our large investment in neural circuits, a lot of our brain power, is in our circuits to produce and process music and art suggests their importance to our design. So if all you do is go to work, stare at a computer, and lift weights, you're missing all of that. And maybe that is actually what makes us more human than what we do for a job, semantically trying to convey information and lifting weights, which your brain does not understand to begin with. It doesn't know what weightlifting is, and most weightlifting doesn't really make sense to the brain because it's not normal human movement. So Patty spoke Greek. It was a different frequency. She heard. To speak another language, you have to use your mouth, your tongue, your lips differently to produce the different sounds. Different languages have different frequencies. These books by Alfred Tomatis, I don't even know how to. He was a French doctor. These two books, The Ear and Language, The Conscious Ear, he talks about this stuff, that languages occur at different frequencies. And there's a lot of fascinating points about that, but it could simply be that her brain experienced her voice, which is movement. Voice is movement. Talking is movement. And it's also breathing. Remember, it could have changed her breathing just slightly. And anytime your brain sends something different than it's normally sensing or experiencing, the body will often relax. And that's what I'm trying to get across here. So there's a lot of different reasons that her hip flexors could have turned off because she spoke Greek. Now, could it also been because she was interacting with me? Would it have worked with someone she didn't know? Maybe, maybe not. You can't separate what just happened with me, because I was the one testing her. If she didn't like me, maybe it wouldn't have changed, because her brain, that emotion, the negative emotion associated with not liking me, and you're going to see that in a later video, would prevent that hip flexor turning off because her brain feels threatened by the environment. So my guess, hearing a different language, hearing her own voice speak a different language, changed a neurological switch in her brain, which allowed her hip flexors to relax. It could also be the way that she was using her mouth and her tongue, which was not the normal way of doing it. Anytime you do something not normal to what the brain is already expecting, it may relax as long as it likes it. Video number 2. This is Natalie, my friend Natalie. Right now she is walking to salsa music. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to play it because I don't want to run afoul of YouTube's rules. But when she walks to salsa, she can adduct. Now she's going to walk to country music, which she does not like. She's still walking on beat. Normally, if your heels hit with the beat, you'll be neutral. Your hip flexors will turn off. Her heels are hitting with the beat, but she's listening to music she does not like, and she loses her neutrality. Her hip flexors turn on again, and she's shocked. I was because I had a feeling that was going to work. This was 2 summers ago, I think. I had a feeling that was going to happen, and it did, and it was like, wow, this is awesome. So that was video number 2, walking to a beat or dancing, as long as you like the music. Your hip flexors will likely turn off. Number 3, this is Justine. I was actually just teaching her and her father their father-daughter wedding dance. So her left hip was already neutral. I already knew it would be because she's rhythmic, and I had just taught her a dance class. So anyway, I brought my table and I tested her a little bit. So it's a little sped up. So her right arm does not internally rotate. Her left arm does internally rotate. That's the right BC pattern. Her neck is relaxed. I'm just making sure that her neck is relaxed, and it completely is. So then I'm only showing, because her left hip was already neutral, I'm showing her right leg abduction. She cannot abduct. It does not go up. So her right inner thigh is overactive, and her left shoulder is also restricted. So now I have her in a dance position, and I have her breathe into my hand, which is, well, I'm going to show you. Watch her abduction now. Bang. Look how high that went up. And you'll also find that her right shoulder has full internal rotation at this point once it gets there. And there you go. So no problem. So what I do, I put my hand, we were in a dance position. I placed her on her left leg. I put my right hand on her left mid-back, which is normal dance position, and I had her breathe into it. And when she expanded that posterior rib cage into my hand, that's all we did. That changed a process of association of the ground underneath her left foot, underneath her left heel in general, and how she breathed. And all that completely turned off her hip flexors, turned off her right inner thigh. Well, actually, her hip flexors are already off. Turned off her right inner thigh, relaxed her back. She had full internal rotation. She had full ranges of motion just through breath while being on the non-dominant side, the left side, to use that left diaphragm. So there you go. So if you breathe appropriately, if you get into a dance position, go onto your left leg, breathe into someone's hand, you'll probably turn off your hip flexors and your right adductor also, unless you have cranial issues, and I've talked about the cranial issues a lot in the past couple videos. And now this is Barry, he's the father. Now he was already neutral, his left hip is neutral also, you'll see. And I got 90s hip hop in the background. His left hip is already neutral because he just did the dance lesson also. So now I'm going to put him back into the pattern. Now he has 90s hip hop, band from New Jersey, a group from New Jersey, the Artifacts, highly recommend it. Okay, so now what I'm going to make him do to put him back into the pattern, to turn his hip flexors on, I'm going to make him arch his back and take a deep breath in. So here I am. I'm going to arch his back. And I'm just trying to stack his legs on top of each other. He's a little heavy. He's a big guy. So I arch his back. He takes a big breath in. And now I'm going to test him again. And now he cannot adduct. So that turned his hip flexors on. So remember, whenever your left side is usually living in a state of extension, arched, in that position you can't use your left diaphragm. You're going to be an obligatory neck breather. So he was neutral, and the moment I made him arch his back and take a breath in, his hip flexors turned back on again, because remember the hip flexors are tied into the diaphragm. So if you arch your back, your diaphragm disengages and your hip flexors will become overactive again. I'm going to get Barry neutral again. He's just going to watch his daughter walk to the rhythm. He's not moving, he's observing his daughter walk to the rhythm, and you'll see what happens. And hopefully, I don't know if you're going to hear the music, but nonetheless, she's walking to the beat. He's watching her walk to the beat. And now I test his left leg adduction again. And no problem. All right. And he says, it's looser. There you go. He said it's a lot looser. All right, so now watch what happens when he watches his daughter walk off beat. So now it's hard to walk off beat if you have good rhythm. But she's now walking off beat, and he's watching her walk off beat. And he knows she's off beat. And now he cannot adduct again, so his hip flexors turn back on. Now she's just going to walk on beat again. So 1, 2, 1, 2. And he said, oh yeah, so much relaxed. So there you go. If you can breathe on your left leg, center your weight over your left foot, your left heel, which all PRI techniques have that inside the PRI techniques. If you can do it without arching your back and using your neck, which you may not do, and you might have too much instability in your body, so this might not work for you right now, but it could in the future once you get stable. So if you can just shift your weight over to your left leg a bit and breathe, that'll inhibit your hip flexors. If you can speak another language, again, if you're not cranially driven with your vision and your teeth and your jaw, which I've covered in other videos, that could turn off your hip flexors, the way that you speak, speaking another language. And then, what was the other one? Oh yeah, just walking, just dancing. Dancing to music you like will relax your brain, it will relax your body. The body responds, the brain responds to rhythms and frequencies that it likes, and that's the most important thing. So if more people kept the things he talks about in this book, if more people kept those things in their life, modern society does not give us that chance. We're sitting in chairs at a very young age. We're constrained in what we have to learn, how we have to act, how we have to sit in school. We're constrained at a very young age, and our brains may rebel against that. Some people may do perfectly fine, others may not. But if you keep these other things in your life, not just semantic learning and conveyance of semantic information, the arts, expression, you may never actually need PRI. So do a PRI program, stabilize your pelvis, learn to breathe with your diaphragms, but then keep this other stuff in your life, and you'll probably never have to see me or another postural restoration therapist again for the rest of your life.